this is the portion where we get into the life of Joseph some more, as he is finally revealing himself to his brothers. But there's some things that we learn in all this about several issues. Jacob, we learned some things about him in chapters 46 and 47. That's where we're going to start. And then God's sovereignty. I don't have a lot of verses and things in here, so it's mostly just, like I said, I didn't have a chance to really get all this stuff into my notes. But look at chapter 46 and 47. And going back up just to the end of 45, this is the section where Jacob, or where Joseph is revealing himself to his brothers, and he says, go back home and tell Dad, essentially, that I'm still alive. And bring him down here, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. And it's going to continue this for another 5 years. If you think this is bad already, then just wait, because it's going to keep coming. And so it starts off with that they went up from Egypt. This is chapter 45, the end of that. They went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over the whole land of Egypt. Now, how hard do you think it was to tell their father that statement by itself? I think it was on purpose that they told him the really good news as quickly as possible, right? Your son Joseph is alive, and so we don't have to explain how that happened. We're going to give you the good news and say, and he's the top dog all the way down there, right? I think they told him that great news to kind of skip over the fact of him asking the question, how did that happen? Y'all with me on that? Have y'all ever had to do anything like that? You don't want them to really ask, so you give them some more information, so they'll just kind of forget about asking that first question, and then they'll skip and go to the amazed part about, he's ruler over all of Egypt? That's amazing! And so they skipped right to that. But notice his reaction to that. It says his heart went numb because he did not believe them. He did not believe them at all. I mean, how hard would it be? How long has Joseph been gone? 22 years? Can you imagine being told that your child is dead? Or somebody, your best friend or your spouse or something else like that is dead. They've disappeared. And then 22 years later, somebody shows back up and says, oh, by the way, they're still alive. It would take a lot to believe that, because it's not like they can show him a picture. It's not like they've got it where, Joseph or, the brothers can all just kind of pick up their phone and take a selfie together and say, look, that's Joseph. They're totally going on word of mouth and having to believe him. He was stunned and shocked in that whole thing. But they told him all of Joseph's words that he had told them. And when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to pick him up, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And then Israel said, enough, my son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die. That's a strange statement there, though. He believes all this stuff because they obviously didn't come down there with all that. But the spirit of their father Jacob revived. So that means for 22 years, what's his spirit been like? He's still been grieving the loss of his son. He's still been kind of in a funk about that situation. Now, has anybody kind of had those kind of moments, loss and pain can put us into a funk that's difficult to come out of. Right? Yeah. And sometimes, and what's weird, what's strange in all of this is we hear nothing of what God has done in and through Jacob during this entire time. For 22 years, we don't know what Jacob and God's relationship is like. What's going on in the land of Canaan where they are all living. That's how much of a funk, if you want to use that word, that Jacob is in. It's you kind of wonder, had Jacob kind of quit and given up, had he stopped trying, had he stopped listening and even asking and calling out for God, I just kind of wonder what his status has been. But it says that his spirit, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And so with that, he's ready to go. He is ready to head out and move on, and he's ready to get back to it. My son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him. So he's eager to go and see him for himself. But something changes or something happens. Before, sometimes we can act rashly. Sometimes we can just jump up and react emotionally. But Jacob has enough wisdom to not do that. If you recall, the last time that Jacob, that we have a record of anyway, of Jacob leaving the land, what was happening to him? He was fleeing from Esau. He was going to get a wife, right? What happened to him just as he was leaving, within the first day or so of him leaving? Who did he meet with?
When he was leaving.
Yeah, he had a meeting with God, essentially, right? God met him at Bethel in that dream. He had told Jacob that the Lord was going to go with him, and the Lord was going to also bring him back. And so that's when he left. And then when he came back, it was like there was that welcome party upon his return. He had the two camps, the camp of the angels. Then there was what we characterized, the way I taught it here, was that celebration dance, essentially. Not so much the wrestling match, in my opinion, but that celebration dance of return back to the land that he had with the Lord back in Genesis 33. But something about him doesn't feel comfortable just jumping up and leaving, not without permission, not without checking with God first. So that's how chapter 46 opens up. And this tells us about the character of Jacob. It says, "So Israel set out along with everything that belonged to him. And when he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. In visions of the night, God said to Israel, 'Jacob, Jacob.' 'Hineni,' he said. 'I am the God of your father. I am God, the God of your father,' he said. 'Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will turn you into a great nation there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I myself will also most certainly bring you up. Joseph will put his hand on your eyes.'" Does that language sound familiar? I mean, before he leaves the land, he offered a sacrifice. He was seeking God's will. This is you might remember the old song, "Should I Stay or Should I Go Now?" Y'all remember that one? It's been a while. Am I the only one who remembers stupid songs? Okay. "If I go, there will be trouble. If I stay, it will be double." See, somebody else knows it. Thank you. But this is one of those kind of moments. Should I stay? Should I go? Lord, what should I do? How should I do this? So, even though he's been in this mess for 22 years, and we don't have a record of him even having a dream or a vision or a conversation with God, for that whole time, something in him has changed, and he is making sure that he goes and seeks him for that. So this is the first record of a vision for Jacob since chapter 35 here in Genesis, where they had that rededication at Bethel. But look what the Lord tells him. "Do not be afraid to go down into Egypt." Now, you ask the question, why would the Lord say that? Why would he say, "Don't be afraid to go," if Jacob wasn't nervous about going? Right? Maybe he was a bit afraid. Why would he be concerned about going down to Egypt and leaving the land?
The land was promised.
The land was promised. Yeah, he didn't want to. I mean, you wouldn't want to think that you're ungrateful in leaving the land that you've been given, right? Because maybe you don't get it back.
Isaac wasn't supposed to leave.
Isaac was never supposed to leave, right? Back in Genesis chapter 15, there was even that promise that was given to Abraham, in verse 13. It says, "Then he said to Abram, know for certain that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I am going to judge the nation that they will serve. Afterward they will go out with many possessions." Okay? What if he's concerned? Because is the exact place mentioned? No, it's not. Yes, Holly?
Well, I was just going to say that his grandfather, he surely heard about that from his grandfather.
Yes. That would have been a promise. That would have been a statement, something that would have been passed down. I mean, Abraham was still alive when Jacob was a young man, right, up until he was about 15. I'm sure that was information that got passed on. So what if he's concerned about this? Because what if Jacob is walking right into this prophecy? Because what does it say? They'll be strangers in a land that's not theirs, and they will be enslaved and oppressed. Does that sound like something you want to just walk into? No. Yes, Gabriel.
It also could be, he's worried about leaving the land to Esau.
Yes, Esau is still there, and while he was gone getting Rachel and Leah, Esau was kind of hardening his position and his status in that whole thing. So if he leaves, then that leaves that power vacuum that Esau would be glad to step into. So that's absolutely right. So, but the prophecy thing, he knows that it could be bad. And will his going down to Egypt, is it going to thwart the will, the purpose, and the promise of God if he leaves? Those are all the kind of questions that might be going through his head. And so he wants that reassurance from God about the status, about the situation. So God makes some promises in there, and they're the same kind of promises that he made before he left the first time. All right? He says, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Because how many people is he now, at this point, that we learn about in a little bit? There's only 70 people that are in his group. So a great nation is going to be made, and they're going to be made this great nation while they're out of the land. All of Jacob's possessions were added to him while he was outside the land. A lot of those blessings came out, and he brought them back in with him. So these are things that might be going through his mind. He says, I'm going to make you into a great nation. And then he says, I will go with you. I myself will go down with you to Egypt. So is the Lord, is he threatened by the gods of Egypt? Are the gods of Egypt going to be able to keep him out and say, hey, we have a border, we have a wall here between Egypt, and your God Jacob can't come? That's not the kind of thing that's going to be stopping him. I am going to be going with you down to Egypt. And then there's that promise again. I myself will also most certainly bring you up. So you're not going to be stuck down there forever. This is a very familiar pattern of promise that has already been made. It's already been kept once. And so if God says that again, how confident do you think he is that God is going to be able to do it again? He's very confident. He's assured of that. Then you get back in 46. It goes through Jacob. He then arises from Beersheba, and Israel's sons carried Jacob, their father, their little children, their wives, and the carts that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And they took everything with them. They brought down to Egypt. Then it goes through the list of the family. Verse 26, it says, all the people belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, those coming from his loins, not counting the wives of Jacob's sons, the tally of all the people was 66. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt was a tally of 2 people. The tally of all the people belonging to Jacob's house who came to Egypt was 70. Okay? Now, why is 70? How is that a significant number?
Represent the nation.
That represents the nations, right? It's the same number of nations mentioned in Genesis 10. It's also the same number of sacrifices that are offered when? During Sukkot. One person representing each nation. And strangely, this is something Vicki and I were talking about this morning. There's a promise that's made in Joshua chapter 1 verse 3 and Deuteronomy chapter 11 that states, everywhere the sole of their feet touches is going to be what?
Belong to them.
It's going to belong to them, right?
They were all over Saudi Arabia, so.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. Where have they been? Where have the Jewish people been throughout history?
All over the world.
To every nation on the planet, the soles of their feet have walked. And not always because they wanted to go there either, right? It's been through the hardship, it's been through the diaspora, it's been through the scattering that their feet have walked everywhere. Because ultimately, whose kingdom is it really? It's the Lord's kingdom. The whole earth is His, and everything in it is His. And so I don't think it's accidental that there are 70 that go down into Egypt, one person representing each nation, because the whole earth, every nation is going to be His. And that's just a powerful, powerful thing.
Kelly?
Yes.
In Acts 7:14, Stephen says the number is 75.
I have not looked at that. I do remember that, but I have not looked into the
So I think he must
various explanations for that.
Joseph had 9 children.
Joseph had 9 children?
That included the other.
Okay, so that's including all of them.
And the wives, beside Judah and Simeon's wife, they had died.
Right. And that's one of the things in there that the statement does say back in 46. Not counting the wives of Jacob's sons. So that means that some people might count them. He's not counting them, but other people might. So there's a few numbers that they could probably have some wiggle room on, depending on who you talk to. But
I think it's the same in the Septuagint.
what's that?
I think it's the same in the Septuagint too.
In the sense that it's 75?
There's a lot of explanations for it.
Oh yeah, there's a wide range of things. I remember looking at it a long time ago.
That's one of those Alaskan singers.
Yeah, but to me that's not really the important thing. I think it's the focus of the nations and representing all of those things and how everything is going to be coming under the kingdom of God. I think this is just one of those symbols that is passing through each of those things. Joseph and Jacob, they meet together. They showed him the way to Goshen. Joseph harnessed his chariot, goes up to meet him. As soon as he appeared before him, he fell on his neck and wept on his neck for some time. Then Israel said to Joseph, "At this time I am ready to die, after seeing your face in person, for you are still alive." I mean, that's just a can you imagine how emotional of a moment that would be for these things to go through? Then in chapter 47, verse 7, it says, "Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh." Now, how is that significant? The greater always blesses the lesser. For one, being brought in before Pharaoh, this could be good, this could be bad, depending on how he responds, right? But in a lot of ways, he does show humility. He does show wisdom in his responses. But Jacob blesses Pharaoh. And what's interesting is that Pharaoh seems to have received it.
Well, they respected age and equated wisdom with age, and he was much older than Pharaoh.
Yes, he was. Pharaoh was probably, I mean, we know Joseph by this time is about 39 years old. And Joseph has become a father to Pharaoh. So Joseph is probably considerably older than Pharaoh. Many of the pharaohs didn't live beyond their 20s at most. That's high. They didn't last very long. So they died young. And so to see somebody like Jacob come in, he's willing to receive that blessing. Someone who in the Egyptian mythology is divine himself, right? Pharaoh was considered a god. And yet he was receiving a blessing from Pharaoh. That's how much respect
From
that they
Jacob.
were having and demonstrating. What's that?
Pharaoh was receiving a blessing from Jacob.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So then he asked him that question. He says, Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked Jacob, "How many days are the years of your life?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojourn are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. Moreover, the days of the years of my life have not attained the days of the years of the lives of my fathers in the days of their sojourn." And it says in verse 10, "And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from Pharaoh's presence." So this is hearing that he's 130 years old was probably phenomenal outside of his entire experience. Then he says, few and difficult compared to his fathers have been his days. And I kind of wonder if he means that, if this is an idiom for saying that I've had few days that have not been hard and not been difficult. Because Jacob has been through quite a lot in his experience. His life has been a struggle and a conflict before he was born, wasn't it? I mean, he was fighting for position, fighting to defend himself from his brother the whole time of his life. It didn't necessarily get better just because he came back after getting married and such as that. But his days have been difficult, and that's not been the experience of his father. He had that so much struggle, but he was able to overcome through it all because of what? Because God is with him. Every step of the way. God has come down and been with him and gone before him and done everything that is necessary for him. Then verse 10 it says that Jacob blesses him again. So he blesses him when he meets him, and then he blesses him when he leaves. So it's like Pharaoh is receiving a double blessing from Jacob. And that's significant, I think. I think it's just that this might be probably, if you were able to locate this kid, this Pharaoh, I wouldn't be surprised if he was the longest living Pharaoh that they had. Because he received this kind of blessing from him. But that's something to look for. So I mean, we learn a lot about Jacob and his life and experience in this portion. We don't hear the end of things yet, but I just think that's some significant things. Then we hear some things that are interesting about God's sovereignty. I don't think we have. Look back in Genesis 45. We read some of these earlier. But where Joseph, he's finally revealing himself to his brothers. And he couldn't restrain himself in front of all those who were standing, so he sends everybody out. He gave his voice to weeping, and the Egyptians hear about it. And of course, they don't know why any of that stuff's happening. But he comes to his brothers in verse 3. He says, I am Joseph, and his first concern is my father still alive. His brothers were unable to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. So Joseph said to his brothers, please come near me. And so they came near. He says, I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold to Egypt. So now don't be grieved and don't be angry in your own eyes that you sold me here, since it was for preserving life that God sent me here before you. For there have been 2 years of famine in the land, and there will be 5 more years yet with no plowing or harvesting. But God sent me ahead of you to ensure a remnant in the land and to keep you alive for a great escape. So now it was not you did not send me here, but God, and he has made me as father to Pharaoh, lord over his whole house, and ruler over the entire land of Egypt. I mean, this is a powerful statement about how God works in our world, and how he works in our lives without always asking our opinion. Right? Does he usually ask our opinion? Sorry, I've got a string here. But he says, God is essentially in charge of this whole situation. Nothing that those guys did caught God by surprise, was not accounted for, was not planned for or prepared for. And the purpose of it was to ensure, was essentially to preserve life. It was for preserving life that God has sent me before you. It wasn't Joseph's comfort. It wasn't Joseph's happiness. That was the most important thing. It was for preserving life. Now, how would y'all like to be in that situation? Would anybody want to be that one? God, use me for your kingdom. Use me for your purposes. And then for him to say, okay, well, this is what it's going to take to preserve life. This is what it's going to take for me to accomplish my purpose and use you in the manner that you're asking. It's going to take you being sold as a slave. It's going to take you enduring suffering and false accusation and betrayal and all of these kind of things. And then eventually, after 20 years, you'll be in a position to save life. Do we like to think that far ahead when we ask for God to do stuff in our life?
We're not patient.
We're not patient.
If we ever thought that far ahead, we'd never ask.
And if we knew what was in between,
Yeah.
we wouldn't ask for that. But it's for preserving life, and it's to ensure that there is a remnant in the land and to keep you alive for this great escape. And he says specifically, God sent me ahead of you. It's not you. You did not send me here, but God did, to become this father to Pharaoh. See, they may have thought, if Joseph had received that dream, those dreams are all the way back at the beginning of his story, and they didn't like those dreams. So they were probably thinking, here's a way that we can thwart and undo and make sure those dreams don't come to pass. Right? He'll never be ruler over us if he's dead. Okay, well, let's not kill him, but if we make him a slave in Egypt,
It won't last long.
yeah, this is a boy who stayed at home most of his life. He's not going to survive. He's not going to be able to tough it through all of those situations. What they thought they were doing in thwarting the dreams that God had given were in reality the instrumental in its fulfillment.
Isn't that the same way with Jesus? Because they thought he would not be there any longer once they crucified him. But lo and behold, they got a surprise.
Yeah. The heart of man plans his course, but Adonai directs his steps. In fact, that was actually one of the things. Isaiah 46 says, remember the former things of old. I am God, there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning, from ancient time, what is yet to come, saying, my purpose will stand, and I will accomplish all that I please. Okay? we're not going to mess up his plan and his purpose. And much of this is remnant of what Satan tries to do. A lot of ways I think he tries to play, to use a football term. You all know what prevent defense is? You're laughing, you know what it is. How often does it work? It usually, I'd say it's almost less than 50% of the time. It usually ends up losing the game for a team that goes into what they call prevent defense, where they stop trying so hard, where they try to keep everything in front of them, and it's one of the things that ends up losing the game for them a lot of times. I can tell I have a lot of football fans in here. But he's trying to prevent the plan and the prophecy of God from coming to pass. Oh, Messiah, he's supposed to come through a descendant of Abraham. Well, I can stop that. How can I stop that from happening if you're the enemy? Kill them all. Yeah, we'll find a way to wipe them out, and then that way they'll never be able to do it. To wipe out his descendants. The scripture says, well, cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree. Then I'll make sure that the Messiah is crucified, that Yeshua is crucified after all. He can't crush the serpent's head if he's dead in the ground and he's cursed. He can't be a holy offering to God if he's cursed. Right? But those efforts are instrumental in accomplishing what God wants to do. And many times, the people that think they're trying to harm you, the people that are out there speaking against you, trying to hurt you, are really God's means to get you where God needs you to be, in order to grow in the kingdom, for you to be more fruitful in the kingdom, to be more effective for the kingdom, or even to bless you. What if where you are right now is preventing you from experiencing the full blessing that he wants to give in your life, but you're comfortable where you're at, you think everything is good, and you're not moving. And so he sends somebody along the way, the goad kind of thing, to kick you and move you on. You may not like any moment of it, but where you end up is actually a lot better than where you were. Right? We would not be here without that kind of experience. We'd be comfortable doing what we had been doing. And yet the Lord has a way of getting us into position to do what he wants us to do and to be ready to receive what he wants that. So the current circumstances that we are in, we cannot allow these things to be the deciding factors of our status with God. In the midst of the persecution, in the midst of the hardship and difficulty, we have a tendency to think, well, man, God, he must be angry with me. He must be done with me. He must be so upset with me that something else is going on. He's like, no, I'm not upset with you at all. But I'm trying to get you where you need to be. Right? Joseph was being the person that he was supposed to be during his time as a slave in Egypt. That did not mean things went well for him, just because he was doing what is right. The bad things, in spite of his good behavior, made him in this position to become the father to Pharaoh. If you remember, Yeshua, he told his disciples to get in the boat and cross the lake, right? And what was waiting for them out in the lake? A storm was. Did Yeshua know the storm was coming?
Probably.
Yeah. Their obedience put them in the path of the storm. Their obedience put them in the path of the storm. It didn't make the storm go away. It took them right to it. So sometimes we have to kind of reprogram how we think. I want to obey God, and I want to do all those things, so God will bless me and things will go well for me. That's how we're programmed to think. That's how a lot of teachers will be out there saying, if you are a person of faith, doing everything by faith in God, then you shouldn't have your problems. You shouldn't have your sicknesses. You shouldn't have money problems or anything else like that. Y'all heard that stuff before? That's not the testimony of Scripture. Sometimes the hardest things happen to those who are the most faithful. And we need to keep that in mind. God's promise and call are more than the feelings or our circumstance. His plan, His will, His goals, His purposes are going to remain despite others' intentions. So Joseph, he teaches amazing things about the will of God. I mean, imagine going through all of those things. Imagine having all of those difficulties and still holding on to your bitterness and your anger and your upset that those things happened at all. Would he have been willing to reach out to his brothers in love and forgiveness if he held on to that bitterness and that anger?
What's that saying? In order for the Lord to use you greatly, He has to break you completely.
I've heard things like that, at
Like
least.
that, yeah.
For to use you greatly, He must break you completely. Yeah, I've heard things like that. But in order for our struggles, in order for our sufferings, all of those things that we experience in life, we can respond to them in one of two ways. They can either make us angry and bitter and angry at God and various other things and push us further away from Him, or we can draw closer to Him and allow, understand that those things, they still hurt. Because Joseph, did he deny that they sold him? No, he says, look, I'm your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. Has he forgotten? No. Is he pretending it didn't happen? No. But he's not letting those actions define who he is now. And so when we approach, he's living out essentially what it means to forgive us of our debts, and as also we forgive those who have debts against us or has trespassed against us. If you're unwilling to do that, then all of the hardship, all of the suffering that you have gone through cannot be redeemed for the purpose that He has for it. Joseph is living out that that Romans 8 passage where it says, He works all things together for the good for those who love God and are called according to His purpose. The statement is trying to make sense of bad things that happen. We try to use it as a catchphrase to say, look how good everything's going to be. But it's spoken to those who are enduring suffering and persecution and difficulty. But if the difficulty makes you so angry and upset or angry at God or whatever else, then the experiences the hardships you do go through cannot be redeemed and used for His purpose. If Joseph had held on to that anger, he would not have reached out to his brothers in love. He would not have been receptive to the will of God and hearing the dreams. He might not have received the revelation of what the dreams meant. He would never have become father to Pharaoh. He would have never been able to save life and preserve a remnant. And so then all that suffering that he went through would not have accomplished the purpose for it.
He'd probably still be in prison, too.
And he'd probably still be in prison. Absolutely. Or if he probably would have been killed earlier. Because even a jealous husband probably would have killed him.
In fact, that was the law of the land at that time. If a slave
Yeah,
they
attacks a family
die
member,
just like that.
yeah, you're done.
You're done. So why he put him in the prison, I think, was because he saw his value.
Itself, yeah, and because of
God's
ultimately
plan.
the favor of the Lord preserved his life
Yep.
for whatever reason. So all of that makes sense, and so he tells us all of that. There's this Isaiah 55. My word will be that. So my word will be that. So my word will be that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me in vain or void, but will accomplish what I intend and will succeed in what I sent it for. He's going to accomplish his purpose. And of course, Joseph also is representative of Messiah. So we've talked about what we learned about Jacob, what we learned about the sovereignty of God, the plan of God. But also there's this sense of that what he represents as Messiah. Since God tells the end from the beginning, look over in chapter 47. Verse 13, it talks about there being no food in all the land, and the famine was very severe. So both the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph collected all the money that could be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain that they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And then the money of the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan ran out. And all of Egypt came to Joseph saying, "Give us food. Why should we die in front of you? Because the money is gone." Of course, then what happens? He says, "Give your livestock, and I'll give it to you for your livestock if the money is gone." So they bring that. Then the next time they come along and they say, we don't have any more money. We don't have any more livestock. Then what? Sell us our land. So we'll sell our land and we'll sell ourselves to you. So they come along. It says in verse 20, so Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh because the Egyptians, each one of them, sold his field, for the famine overcame them. Thus the land became Pharaoh's. And then in verse 23, then Joseph said to the people, "Behold, I have bought you and your land today for Pharaoh." So all of this stuff is going on. All of that stuff ended up belonging to Pharaoh. When we talked about this earlier, how much of everything belongs to the Lord? Everything belongs to the Lord. When Yeshua returns and sets up his kingdom on earth, is there going to be any part of it that's not his? Or is the whole earth going to be under his rule and his reign? Right? And as Isaiah 2 talks about, what goes forth from Zion? His word is going to go forth. And what's it going to do? It's going to succeed in whatever he sends it out for. Right? So the Torah goes forth from Zion, as we read about in Zechariah. It says, if people will be coming to Jerusalem for things like the feast, for Sukkot in particular, right? And if they don't come up for Sukkot, what do they not get? They don't get rain. So they're going to experience a drought if they don't come and be under and submit to the rule and the reign of Yeshua on the throne. Of course, rain also at the time represents the scriptures, the Word of God, right? So he talks about there's various times that there has been a drought for the Word of God. So all of these things kind of fit together. What happens at Sukkot every year? It's supposed to be a time of rain, but as far as ceremonial, what did we do?
The water libation.
The water libation? But what do they do with the scriptures?
Oh, read it.
They read the scriptures. Stay with me now. I know my brain works a little funny sometimes.
Pouring of the water of the word.
Yeah, the pouring of the water of the word. Those things are symbolized and go together. Every 7 years, what are they supposed to do? Read the whole thing, either all of the Torah or Deuteronomy. I know there's debate on that issue, but essentially you're going to have 7 years of blessing and abundance, or you're going to have 7 years of famine and drought. It's the same kind of pattern that's here with the life of Joseph. So without that rain, there's this drought. Without the word, there is a drought. There will be a famine for the Word of God. And everyone has to go, in this situation, everyone has to go to Joseph to be fed, to get the rain, to get the Word, to survive, including his brothers. In the kingdom, everybody has to go to Messiah to get the reign. Everyone has to go to Messiah to get the word. And even, his own people, even his own brothers have to go in order to receive that blessing from him. But here's the thing, with the situation that's going on in the life of Joseph, there's two kinds of people that are there. You can either be his slave or you can be his family. You can be his slave or you can be his family. Because what's the difference? This is what struck me this time as we were reading through that. It cost the Egyptians everything during this famine. They sold everything they had. They ran out of money. They ran out of livestock. They sold their land. They sold themselves. But there's no mention of the Israelites having to do that. Why not?
Joseph promised.
Joseph promised.
They knew a guy.
They knew a guy, yeah.
Inside connections.
Now, ultimately, isn't that what he wants from, even from the Egyptians? Ultimately, isn't that what he wants from us? He doesn't really want our money. He doesn't really want our property or our land. He really wants us, right? But it's interesting to think that Messiah, he takes care of his own. The family is provided for. That's what he promised back in chapter 45, verse 11. He says, I'll provide food for you there, for the famine will last another 5 years. So the family is provided for, and as the Egyptians are selling their land, look at the very end of this portion, verse 27, the last verse of this portion, says, meanwhile, Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and what did they do?
Acquired possessions.
And?
Were productive, and their numbers increased mightily.
Yeah, mine says acquired property in it. Yeah, possessions. So while the Egyptians are having to sell everything,
They're buying.
they're buying.
Gotta be a buyer.
Yeah, it's Mr. Potter, kind of a thing in It's a Wonderful Life. While everybody else is panicking, while everybody else is freaking out and selling everything, he's buying, and so because he's the one buying, he's Pharaoh in that situation. He's essentially coming to own everything, right? But because they are family, because they are provided for, they are taken care of, they're able to acquire property, they're able to acquire land, they're able to acquire, and to the point that now that Pharaoh is given all of this livestock, who's going to take care of it? They are. Pharaoh specifically says that, hey, if there are some skilled men among them, give them my livestock so they can take care of and manage it. Okay, when everyone else is selling, they're the ones that are buying. And you think about the parable that you read about in the New Testament about the talents, Luke 19, Matthew 25, where they're given certain responsibilities, right? One is given 1 talent, 5 talents, 10 talents. When they demonstrate and prove that they are faithful with what they've been given, what happens?
They're blessed.
They're given more, right? It says, he says, well done, my good and faithful slave. You have been proven faithful in the little things. Take charge of what? More things, but in Luke it specifically says, talking about cities. Be the ruler, be the leader of these cities. They're acquiring the property in the land, things like that. So as we demonstrate, and as we are family, as we are taken care of in the kingdom, we are given greater and greater responsibility in all of that. To where, while everybody else is selling, you're acquiring. Right, that's just some of the blessing that comes in the kingdom, to where we are given greater responsibility even over those who are still living, still present at the time of the kingdom. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. We're seeing all of this kind of be building. This pattern has been told from the beginning This pattern that he said all the way back here in Genesis is also a similar pattern that we get to see at the end. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it also says that the wealth of the wicked will be
Transferred.
to the righteous.
Yeah, transferred to the righteous. So that the world, that the nations, their wealth will be pouring into you. So yeah, it's that same kind of pattern. So even here in Joseph's life, we see additional evidence or patterns for what the kingdom is going to be like. That's all I have on those three things,